Hello everyone. First of all, I will want to welcome you on my YouTube channel Medicine 360. From here onward, we will continue lectures on different topics in details. I try my level best to explain you each and everything about each disease related to medicine, surgery, gynae, obs and pediatrics. And today our topic of discussion is atrial fibrillation. We discuss the atrial fibrillation in details about its types, risk factors and associations, how we will take history examination of the patients, and sign and symptoms, what will be the differential diagnosis, how we investigate the atrial fibrillation, what will be the prognosis and management of the patient. We will move to the next slide. Now, what is the atrial fibrillation? Atrial fibrillation is characterized by the irregular and rapid heart rate. It is the most common type of arrhythmia, and first of all, we will discuss its types. Atrial fibrillation can be acute, chronic, and also recurrent. What is the recurrent atrial fibrillation? When the atrial fibrillation episode are two or more than two, it is called recurrent atrial fibrillation. These types are according to the American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, and Heart Rhythm Society. The first type is the paroxysmal atrial fibrillation. If the recurrent atrial fibrillation or the recurrent episodes are two or more than, it is called recurrent, and recurrent atrial fibrillation actually termed as paroxysmal atrial fibrillation. The paroxysmal atrial fibrillation do not require treatment or intervention. It is spontaneously terminate within the 7 days, and most commonly terminates in 24 hours. In some cases, atrial fibrillation, paroxysmal atrial fibrillation can be lead to paroxysmal atrial fibrillation. The second type is the persistent atrial fibrillation. If the paroxysmal atrial fibrillation continue more than 7 days, then it is called persistent atrial fibrillation. And to terminate the atrial fibrillation, which is persistent, require intervention. Means we will give treatment to terminate the persistent atrial fibrillation. If the atrial fibrillation persists more than 12 months, then it is called long-standing persistent atrial fibrillation. Then there is the fourth type, which is permanent atrial fibrillation. In this type, doctor and patient both decide to stop further treatment regarding the sinus rhythm. To maintain the sinus rhythm, we stop the further treatment. We treat only the anticoagulation. We give anticoagulation therapy or ventricular rate control, but we do not do any attempts to maintain the sinus rhythm or any treatment to restore the sinus rhythm. Now, there are some causes which are reversible regarding the atrial fibrillation. For example, in thyrotoxicosis, if we remove the source of the increased thyroid hormones, it will terminate. There are electrolyte abnormalities, ethanol intoxication, and sepsis. Actually, these reversible causes of atrial fibrillation are not included in upper discussed classifications, as once the precipitory factors ends are treated, it will terminate, and there are less chances of its reoccurrence. Then there is a term lone atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation without structural heart disease. In young patients, it's called lone atrial fibrillation. It means there is no structural defects related to mitral regurgitation, mitral stenosis, or related to rheumatic heart disease. Without any structural heart problem, If there is atrial fibrillation, then it is called lone atrial fibrillation, and it is most common in young patients. Now we will discuss risk factors and the associations. It's mean which are the conditions which are associated and can lead to the presence of atrial fibrillation, or can cause atrial fibrillation ultimately if not treated properly. The most common risk factors, which are called upstream risk factors, or you can say the atrial fibrillation can be associated in these factors, are the heart failure, coronary artery disease, diabetes mellitus, hypertension, valvular heart disease. And some books say the hypertension is the most common cause of atrial fibrillation. So where there is atrial fibrillation, these diseases can also be present in most of the cases. These are the most important factors. Then are the other factors like catecholamine excess, for example in pheochromocytoma, hemodynamic stress, it's mean volume overload, for example MR, mitral regurg. In mitral regurgitation, there is increase and diastolic volume of left heart, and dilated ventricles, which are major risk factor for the development of the atrial fibrillation. Then is the aortic regurgitation, which is also a volume overload condition, as there is increase in end systolic volume. Then there is left ventricular failure. It can be due to any cause. It can be due to MR, AR, or other dilated cardiomyopathies. Then there is the hypertension, in which hemodynamic stress is present. Then the other cause is atrial ischemia can cause atrial fibrillation. This is also a very important risk factor. For example, coronary heart disease, in case of MI, myocardial infarction, the atrial ischemia can cause the atrial fibrillation. Then there is the inflammation of the heart, which include myocarditis, and myocarditis can be viral and other causes. And the pericarditis, can be caused by the viral pericarditis, immunoinflammatory conditions, chronic inflammations, other infections. These infections can lead to atrial fibrillation. They can cause the excitation of the tissues and ultimately can cause atrial fibrillation. Then there is the metabolic stresses. Metabolic stresses are of many types. It can be include like increased thyroid hormones, increased catecholamines, or metabolic stress can also be diabetes, non cardiovascular respiratory causes, for example pulmonary embolism. In pulmonary embolism or recurrent pulmonary embolism, there will be this stress on the right heart, and right heart can pulmonary embolism can lead to right heart failure, and it can also lead to atrial fibrillation. There is the carcinoma of the lung, and pneumonia can also cause the atrial fibrillation. Then alcohol use can cause atrial fibrillation, but binge alcohol use is one of the common cause to cause paroxysmal atrial fibrillation or acute atrial fibrillation. Most of the young people, when they do binge alcohol drinking, they can present with palpitation and other signs symptoms of atrial fibrillation, but it don't need any treatment, and it terminates on its own. So binge alcohol use can lead to atrial fibrillation, and it is also called holiday heart syndrome. Then the other factors are drug use, which are the stimulants, cocaine, amphetamine, endocrine, as we already discussed about thyrotoxicosis, pheochromocytoma, and diabetes mellitus, neurological disorders, which include subarachnoid hemorrhage and stroke. Active thromboembolic events, as in the stroke or subarachnoid hemorrhage. In some people with subarachnoid have hypertension, which can cause heart problems, and other heart diseases can be associated with subarachnoid hemorrhage. So this can lead to the atrial fibrillation. Genetic factors can be involved, which include familial atrial fibrillation or ion channel abnormalities. Advancing age is one of the most common cause, as there is as the age increases, stiffness of the atria increases and fibrosis. This lead to the atrial fibrillation. Anemia, as anemia, you know that it cause high output, cardiac failure ultimately, or and cardiac stress. So this can lead to the atrial fibrillation. CKD, uh, in chronic kidney disease, there will be the anemia, there will be the electrolyte abnormalities, there will be the volume overload conditions, and other hormonal abnormalities ultimately can lead to the atrial fibrillation. Then we will discuss signs, symptoms, history and examination, how we will take history and examination to the patients. And history and examination is all about we will see the risk factors. In history, we exclude the risk factors, we see the examination related to the risk factors, and we want to include the etiology, want to rule out what is the etiology of the atrial fibrillation and want to establish the atrial fibrillation. So in history, we will investigate about type of the atrial fibrillation, duration, frequency, precipitating factors, light exertion, sleep, caffeine, alcohol use, how we can do the termination of the atrial fibrillation or previous history for that, documentation of prior use of antiarrhythmics, rate controlling agents, and about the presence of underlying heart diseases, and any past surgical and medical history. In physical examination, we take the vital signs, the heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, oxygen saturation, and other things. All these will indicate is this is either atrial fibrillation is present or not. Then we do the head and neck examination, in which we'll do see the total thyroid examination, eye examination, exophthalmos, and elevated jugular venous pressure, cyanosis, carotid bruit. These all diseases can indicate or other comorbidities with atrial fibrillation. Then in pulmonary examination, we will see the rales, pleural effusions, wheezes, or any diminished bronchial sounds, which can be the cause of COPD, which will be due to the COPD or asthma. In cardiac auscultation and palpation, and there will be any murmur, volume overload, S3 or S4 sound. In abdominal examination, we see the ascites, hepatomegaly, and other intrinsic causes of the liver, peripheral embolism. In lower extremities, we will see cold pulseless extremities, as in peripheral artery disease, peripheral embolism. Assessment of the peripheral pulses, about the cardiac peripheral decreased pulses can be assessment of decreased cardiac output. Then we see the neurological examination about the transient ischemic attack and cardiovascular accidents. Uh, these all things can help us to further see the comorbidities in the atrial fibrillation and the etiology of atrial fibrillation. Now, what are the signs and symptoms? Patient can be asymptomatic in atrial fibrillation, or in severe cases it can be in cardiogenic shock or cardiovascular accident. The minor signs and symptoms will be the fatigue, generalized weakness, poor exercise tolerance, dizziness, dyspnea, tachycardia, palpitation, and irregular rhythm. It's mean irregular rhythm in which the beat are continuously varying with related to duration between the beats. Pre-syncope and syncope, angina, decompensated heart failure. These all signs and symptoms are any of these can be present, or patient can be asymptomatic. Uh, Now we will move to the differential diagnosis. Differential diagnosis of the AFib include atrial flutters, atrial tachycardia, AV nodal reentry tachycardia, multifocal atrial tachycardia, paroxysmal SVT, and WPW syndrome. In next series of lectures, we will know detail about these and we will differentiate easily after that. Now we will see in atrial flutters there on ECG we can differentiate atrial flutter and atrial fibrillation. As in atrial fibrillation there is the sawtooth typical sawtooth pattern in most of the cases, and in atrial tachycardia there will be presence of P wave but there is the increased heart rate. In AV nodal reentrant tachycardia, in this there is one fast and one slow conducting pathway. In this type of arrhythmia there may be multifocal atrial tachycardia in which different part of the atria are showing excitation and increase the atrial heart rate. Then there is paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia and Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. There is in Wolff-Parkinson syndrome there is an accessory pathway, and on ECG finding there will be the delta wave, broad QRS complex and short PR interval. Then we will discuss about investigation or how we can say indefinite that this is atrial fibrillation, or what are the confirmatory tests which can which can help us to diagnose the atrial fibrillation. First of all, we will do which initial test and the diagnostic test for atrial fibrillation is the ECG. Then now we will discuss what will be the finding in ECG. ECG, first of all, as we said that ECG confirms the diagnosis. There will be irregular ventricular rate, and inferior slide will show there is different RR interval in each beat, and there is continuously variation in the RR duration. So there is the irregular ventricular rate, absence of the discrete P wave. Either in the ECG there will be no P wave, or there will be the chaotic fibrillary waves, as in this example there is present this type of fibrillation waves. And there is we will discuss Ashman phenomena. What is this? As we see there, this is the long duration between the RR, then there is the short duration between the RR. In some ECG stripes there will be the after long and short there will be the an abnormal QRS complex, as it appears like just like escape beats, but we do not call this escape beat. In atrial fibrillation we call this Ashman phenomena. Actually myocardium is in refractory period, but as atrial rate is increased, so ventricular rate abnormally show the QRS complex in as myocardium is in refractory period. So aberrantly conducting beats after long and short RR cycle is called Ashman phenomena. Heart rate will be the typically different in atrial fibrillation. Heart rate will be the 110 to 140 beats in most of the people, and rarely greater than 160 to 170. In uncontrolled it will be the 160 to 170, but most of the cases it will be lie between the 110 to 140 beats per minute. Atrial rate will be the 350 to 600 beats on ECG, as we can say this is in this atrial rate is very high. Other findings which can be present, as we know that atrial fibrillation can be present in other disease like congestive heart failure. There will also the left ventricular hypertrophy. So on ECG there can also be present left ventricular hypertrophy, bundle branch block findings, and intraventricular conduction delays. There also be finding of acute or prior MI. Here is the 12 lead ECG, and first of all we will see the rhythm, and every QRS complex is of different duration from the other. So this is irregular rhythm, and in case of a regular rhythm, we calculate heart rate by seeing the by looking at the big boxes between the RR. For example, from here to here there are approximately two big boxes, so we divide the 300 divided by number of big boxes. Then we will calculate heart rate, or in case for example in this case if we calculate it will be 150, but as this is the irregular rhythm, so we cannot calculate the rate by this formula. In the irregular rhythm, we will use the formula number of R waves in 6 seconds multiplied by 10. So there is in this ECG we will I calculate the number of R waves in 6 seconds. There are 70s. One big box is equal to 0.2 seconds, and there will be the 30 big boxes which are equal to 6 seconds. So there will be heart rate, or in this, according to this ECG, the patient has heart rate 170 beats per minute. So one can diagnose atrial fibrillation on ECG by looking the irregular heart rate, irregular rhythm, and rapid heart rate. Now we do the brief discussion about how rhythm stripe appear on the monitor in the emergency department. In emergency, we see on the monitor rhythm. In this case, you will see that the RR complexes are on not equal duration. They are on different duration. Some has longer duration, some has short duration. So this is the typical finding in atrial fibrillation, that QRS complexes are irregularly placed. So rhythm is irregular, and you see the base is not equal, and there is no specific P wave, but there is the fibrillary waves are present in this. Other tests, which other tests we will do, not for the diagnosis but also for the other abnormalities, are to know the other risk factors to the patients or comorbidities. For example, echocardiography, uh, for the evaluation of the valvular heart disease. Either there is rheumatic heart disease, or infective endocarditis, or any other abnormalities of heart can be evaluated with the echocardiography. Then the chamber walls, there is the hypertrophy or dilated heart chambers. Then the functions of the heart, hypokinesis, is there any hypokinesis as in the MI? There is the presence of thrombus, pulmonary arterial hypertension. Pulmonary arterial hypertension, in as we know that in some cases there is the idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension, and this can lead to the right ventricular failure, and it can also be the factor for the atrial fibrillation. Pericardial diseases can be evaluated by the echocardiography. Then we do not need in all patients echocardiography. We need in some patients which have other risk factors. In the similar way, we do the CT scan and MRI in certain patients. For example, in patients with atrial fibrillation, and also patient have positive D dimer. It means patient has high risk of developing the pulmonary embolism, or patient already developed pulmonary embolism. So we will do the CT scan to establish the etiology of the atrial fibrillation. It might be the pulmonary embolism. Then we also do the MRI or CT scan if we plan the atrial fibrillation ablation. So to know the atrial anatomy, we will do the MRI. Then exercise test to rule out ischemia. For example, a patient has a stable angina, and we want to know is this is the established diagnosis. We do the exercise test. Then is the Holter monitoring to ablation diagnosis as in paroxysmal atrial fibrillation. In a paroxysmal atrial fibrillation, the episode appear and then disappear. By using Holter monitor, we can capture that episode. Electrophysiological studies in some patients or baselines in which CBC, we do CBC to know the patient is anemic, which we know there is a risk factor. Anemia is the risk factor. Then there is RFTs, which will see the kidney status. ACKD can cause atrial fibrillation. Now, what will be the prognosis of atrial fibrillation? Prognosis of the atrial fibrillation depends on the risk for the thromboembolic events. If the risk of the thromboembolic events are high, so prognosis will be poor. So increased morbidity and mortality in part due to the increased thromboembolic disease, particularly stroke. Thrombus commonly develop in the left atrial appendage. Most of the thrombi form in the left atrium appendage, and in some cases we will ablate the or can destroy that left atrial appendage to prevent the further thromboembolic events. In some cases, not in all cases. And I forget one thing to mention that sometime in USMLE or UWorld there will be the question that which is the main focus of main focus for AF, and the main area which cause the excitation and lead to the atrial fibrillation, which lead main focus is the pulmonary artery, pulmonary veins. Actually, pulmonary veins muscles or tissues are somewhat different from the atria, and they are more excited tissues. So they can lead to the re-excitation and can lead to the atrial fibrillation. And in case of atrial flutter, the most common site for the atrial flutter excitation are the near the tricuspid area or tricuspid annulus. Now we will discuss the management, how we, and these are the managements are according to American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, and Heart Rhythm Society. We will discuss one by one how we control the heart in the atrial fibrillation, how we maintain the sinus rhythm or achieve the sinus rhythm, and there is the what are the anticoagulants or how we do the anticoagulant to the patient. First of all, rate control strategies. Rate of the in the atrial fibrillation depends on the AV nodal conduction. AV nodal conduction now influences by many things, like intrinsic factors can influence the AV nodal conduction, and there are some extrinsic factors which can influence the AV nodal conduction. The most important one, the intrinsic factor of the AV nodal conduction, which are the intrinsic refractory period. Then there is the parasympathetic nervous system, which can increase the refractiveness of the AV node, and sympathetic nervous system, which can decrease the refractiveness and increase the rate of the impulse conduction in the atrial fibrillation. And rate controlling agents increase AV nodal refractiveness. We increase the refractory period of the AV node in the atrial fibrillation by using drugs. So what are our strategy for the rate control strategy? Less than 110 beats per minute heart rate is the rate control strategy, and this is according to the American Heart Association. The first line drug for the at rate control are the beta blockers and the calcium channel blockers. In beta blockers, mostly we use beta 1 selective, for example, metoprolol. We do not use mostly the non selective beta blockers like propranolol, because in case of COPD or in case of asthma, the non selective beta blockers can increase the severity of these diseases, like asthma. Patient with comorbidities like asthma can increase the severity of the asthma or COPD. So we do not use the non-selective beta blocker, we use the beta 1 selective like metoprolol, and the dose of the metoprolol is the 25 to 100 milligram orally twice a day. We can prescribe in rate control strategies this dose. And the calcium channel blockers also the first line agents for the rate control, and most of the time diltiazem is used, and also verapamil and diltiazem both can be used, and they are the non dihydropyridine calcium channel blockers. We do not use in this amlodipine or other dipines. So what will be the dose of diltiazem? It will be the 20 milligram IV over 2 minutes. And if we achieve the rate control, then we do not repeat the dose. And if the rate control is not achieved, then we can repeat the dose after 15 minutes with 25 milligram over 2 minutes. And these two class the beta blockers, which will be this beta 1 selective beta blockers, and the calcium channel blockers will be which will be the non dihydropyridine calcium channel blockers. If these two, if we cannot prescribe these tools, or these tools are contraindicated in some patients, so we will, in some conditions, we can move to the digoxin. For example, in heart failure patient, we cannot prescribe beta blocker or calcium channel blocker, which can increase the severity of the heart failure. So we can prescribe digoxin with other therapies, with other drugs. We rarely use digoxin as a monotherapy. So digoxin is mostly indicated in heart failure patient with atrial fibrillation and decreased left ventricular, or in patient with the decreased left ventricular function. What will be the dose of digoxin? In initial or in hospital setting, we use 10 to 12 microgram per kg. Orally we can use, or we can use 8 to 12 microgram IV or intramuscular in 3 dividing doses. How we use we calculate the dose of the digoxin for the patient with related to 8 to 12 microgram per kg. 50% of their dose, for 70 kg man, the dose will be approximately 0.5 milligram, 0.5 milligram. With 50% of the dose, for example 0.25 milligram, we initially give loading dose. Then if the rate control is achieved, then we discontinue the drug. If the rate control is not achieved, then we will give 20% of that calculated dose to the patient after 6 to 8 hours. We can also repeat the third dose after 6 to 8 hours. Once the rate is achieved, we discontinue the drug and we discharge the patient on 3.5 to 5.1 microgram per kg orally once a day. If we cannot prescribe beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, digoxin, or these drugs are unable to achieve the rate control strategies, then we use amiodarone for the rate control, especially in patients who are tolerant or unresponsive to the other rate controlling drugs, or in patient with congestive heart failure. The dose of the amiodarone will be the 300 milligram IV over first hour in hospital setting, or initially in loading dose. Then we will give 10 to 50 milligram per hour IV over next 24, or give in the diluted form. Always remember, amiodarone is always given, should be given in diluted form. And you should also notice the every brand name contain different amount of drug or different ml of drug, and each ml contain different amount of drug. So consider the amount according to that brand name, but the exact amount is 300 milligram IV over 1 hour. You can adjust according to mls on that. So once the rate is achieved, then we discharge the patient on 100 to 200 milligram per day orally dose for the patient. In patient in which all of the strategies of rate control are failed, in that patient we will do AV nodal ablation and pacemaker implantation. Now we will talk about rhythm control strategies. What does that mean? As in atrial fibrillation, there is the irregular rhythm, and we want to achieve the same normal sinus rhythm, which is regularly regular. For that, we consider in home patients we do the rhythm control strategies. Those patients who are hemodynamically unstable patients, are those patients which have no functional abnormalities, or there is no structural abnormalities. In those patients we want to achieve rhythm control strategies. How many types of rhythm control strategies are there? Are two types of rhythm control strategies. One is the electrical cardioversion and the other is pharmacological cardioversions. In electrical cardioversion, our patient which present in emergency and with unstable, with hemodynamically instability. Hemodynamically unstable patient means there is tachycardia, tachypnea, hypovolemia or hypotension with confusion. These patients are considered hemodynamically unstable, and we do the electrical cardioversion, in which we do this synchronized cardioversion. There are two type of cardioversion. One is synchronized, in which we give the current 100 200 joules to the patient, that synchronized with the QRS complex of the patient. In case of ventricular fibrillation, we do defibrillator or unsynchronized cardioversion. In that we don't need to compare the current time with the QRS complex of the patient, as there is no specific QRS complex in the ventricular fibrillation. So a patient, a young patient which present in emergency for the first time, or for the recurrent atrial fibrillation with hemodynamically unstable patient, we do the synchronized electrical cardioversion. Now electrical cardioversion or other cardioversion can be done electively or in emergency. As I earlier said that we do the emergency in a hemodynamically unstable patient, we do the electrical cardioversion in emergency, or it can be done with electively. Patient with chronic atrial fibrillation, we do the electrical, or patient with stable hemodynamics, we do the electrical cardioversion electively. So cardioversion will be the most successful if it will initiated within the 7 days of the onset of the atrial fibrillation, and this successful rate are the for the cardioversion are the 75%, and successful rate will increase if we use ACE inhibitors or statics, which decrease the incidence of the atrial fibrillation. Now the other type, which is the pharmacological cardioversion, we use antiarrhythmics like flecainide, propafenone, dofetilide, amiodarone, and sotalol. But the amiodarone is the drug of choice for the pharmacological cardioversion because it decreases the pro-arrhythmic effects. All others antiarrhythmics can cause arrhythmia, but the pro-arrhythmic effect of the amiodarone is less than the other drugs. For that, we use 400 to 600 milligram per day in divided doses, BD or TDS for 2 to 4 weeks, and then we give 100 to 200 per day for continuation. If cardioversion is not achieved with electrical cardioversion or pharmacological aversion, we can do ablation. Ablation of the that tissues which show the excitation, as we earlier mentioned that the pulmonary veins are the most common site for the atrial fibrillation. We ablate that tissue which are most excitable to achieve the sinus rhythm. So for that we can do catheter based surgery, surgical open surgery, or can we use both in those which are intolerant to antiarrhythmics patients. Now we do in surgery there is one surgery called the pulmonary vein separation surgery, in which we separate those tissue which are excitable. The tissue of the pulmonary veins, we separate them from the cardiac tissues so that the excitation does not reach to the heart. Then what are the complications associated with the ablation of these tissues? The complications can be cardiac perforation, pericardial effusion, cardiac tamponade, vascular access complications, pulmonary vein stenosis, thromboembolism, atrioesophageal fistulas, left atrial flutter, tachycardia, phrenic nerve palsy, etc. Now, the one of the most common thing in the management of the atrial fibrillation is the anticoagulation. What is the criteria for anticoagulation? We decide whether we want to start the anticoagulation or not on the Chadwick score. There are these modalities which are included in Chadwick score. There is the congestive heart failure. Each modality has its own score, and total score is 9. In this congestive heart failure, hypertension, diabetes, diabetes and vascular disease like prior myocardial infarction, peripheral artery disease, and aortic plaque, and age 65 to 74, and sex age female 1. These are the one, and age factor, which is if it is greater than equal to 75, it has 2 score, and other thing which has 2 score are the stroke and transient ischemic and thromboembolism, because these two things can increase the risk of thromboembolic events. That's why it has 2 number as compared to the other ones. So if we count these one, this is total 10, but we consider one of these. In case of age might be this one or that one. So total score is 9. Considering this score, American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, and Heart Rhythm Society recommends the antithrombic therapy for the atrial fibrillation, or if patient is non-valvular atrial fibrillation. If the atrial fibrillation is non-valvular or valvular, or CHA2DS score is 0, so there is no need of antithrombic therapy or antiplatelet therapy. Like some people start aspirin, so we do not need aspirin if we have CHA2DS score 0. And if there is the non-valvular atrial fibrillation and CHA2DS score is 1, there is debatable if we should start the antithrombic therapy or not. Some people start the antithrombic therapy if score is 1, or they do not start the antithrombic therapy. But if there is a previous stroke risk or transient ischemic attack, because previous stroke, recent transient ischemic attack in Chadwick score has 2 score. Then if Chadwick score other than these have equal to 2, we must start antithrombic therapy. What are the drugs including antithrombotic therapy, we will discuss later on. Now anticoagulations in case of cardioversion, in case of electrical cardioversion, we American Heart Association recommends the 3 weeks before and 4 weeks after cardioversion anticoagulation therapy in the case of rhythm control strategy. Now, what are the anticoagulants, their antidotes and the dosages? Warfarin is the most common one anticoagulants, and its antidotes are the vitamin K, FFP and PCC. In case of rapid antidote, in case of to achieve the rapid coagulation or to diminish the effect of warfarin, we use fresh frozen plasma or prothrombin complex concentrate. Prothrombin complex concentrates are rapid in reversal of the anticoagulants. These contain factor 2, 7, 9, 10, to whom warfarin decrease the level of that anticoagulants. What is the dosage of warfarin? It is 2 to 10 milligram per day, and we adjust the dose according to NR. If the NR is below the we set our set point, we increase the dose, or if our INR is greater than our set point, we decrease the dose. Then there is the bigatran, which is an thrombin 3 inhibitor, prothrombin 3 inhibitor. For that antidote is adalimumab, which is the antibodies, which are the antibodies, and FDA improved its drug is dose is 150 milligram twice a day. This dose is approved by FDA. Now the other anticoagulants, there are rivaroxaban, apixaban, adoxaban. These are the factor 10 inhibitors. These are factor 10 activated factor 10 inhibitors, and their antidotes are adaxanet alpha. And these antidotes are not FDA improved, but the antidotes of the warfarin are FDA approved. And the drug of the rivaroxaban is the 20 milligram OD, and the apixaban is the 5 milligram twice a day, and the adoxaban is the 60 milligram once a day. Now we will compare the side effects and advantages, or we can say disadvantages and advantages of the anticoagulants between warfarin and the other. These one are the newer anticoagulants. We will see what are the advantages and disadvantages of these. There are several advantages of using the newer anticoagulants over warfarin. What are these? These are the fewer drug-drug interactions and dietary effects. Now, in case of warfarin, there are certain drugs which can affect its metabolism, like chronic alcohol use, phenytoin, phenobarbital, rifampin, graciofulvin, carbamazepine. These will induce the degradation of the warfarin and decrease its blood level. And there are other drugs which can increase the level of warfarin by reducing its degradation. Those can be isoniazid, valproic acid, ketoconazole, fluconazole, etc. Now the newer anticoagulants have lower level of drug-drug interactions or dietary effects, which can increase or decrease their blood levels. Low risk of intracranial bleed in case of newer drugs, rapid onset and an offset of the action, so we do not need any bridging during the initiation or after interruption. In case of warfarin, we initially give heparin, then we start warfarin, and few days later we stop the heparin and continue with warfarin. So this effect is called bridging effect. If we do not give heparin, more in some cases warfarin as inhibit the anticoagulants which are the protein C and S, and coagulants which are factor 2, 7, 9, 10, and the half life of the protein C and S is shorter than the coagulant factors. So protein C and S, which are anticoagulants, diminish earlier as compared to coagulants, and there is the risk of microthrombi in these vessels, and there is this necrosis of the tissues, and there is this skin necrosis in case of warfarin. In some patients, not in all the patients, if we do not bridge its initiation with the heparin. So in case of newer anticoagulants, there is no need of any bridging. No need for the periodic INR testing in case of warfarin. We have to check the warfarin periodically after a month or two. Superiority to warfarin for reducing the risk of thromboembolic events in the dabigatran 150 mg BD or apixaban. So in case of different researches, it is improved that the thromboembolic events with the dabigatran 150 mg twice a day are less. Thromboembolic events are less in case of dabigatran dosage as compared to warfarin. So these drugs are superior than warfarin in case of that. Now these are next are the disadvantages. What are the disadvantages of the anticoagulants? They require strict compliance, means as they have not longer half lives. So we need strict compliance so that the anticoagulants effect diminish soon. No FDA approved several agents, as I earlier mentioned that these agents, which are the antidotes for the newer anticoagulants, are not FDA approved. No data for their use in the presence of prosthetic heart valves. In case of prosthetic heart valves or valvular atrial fibrillation, we use warfarin. But in patients those with non-valvular heart disease, we use the newer agents preferably. Or due to hemodynamically significant mitral stenosis, we cannot use the newer agents. No data for their use in the pregnant or lactating mothers, children, in recent patient with recent stroke or reversible causes of atrial fibrillation, severe increase in BP or significant liver diseases. Data is not present, it means there is fewer research related to that. Lack of reliable blood test to ascertain therapeutic level of therapeutic effect or toxicity. We not have that reliable test for them. Now, what are the goal for the INR to initiate in patients which are on anticoagulant warfarin? INR goal in most of the patient is between 2 to 3. International normalized ratio. In those patients who are at high risk of stroke or artificial heart valves or rheumatic heart disease, we give our goal of INR is 2.5 to 3.5, which is more than normal goal. And in case of elderly patients which are high risk of fall and bleeding, our INR goal is 1.8 to 2. Now, American Academy of Family Physicians, some people recommend both antiplatelet and anticoagulants in atrial fibrillation, but American Academy of Family Physicians do not recommend this and is strongly not recommended to the patients of atrial fibrillation, the both at the same time. Now, what are the major adverse effects of the anticoagulant therapy with warfarin? Is the most common side effect of both are the bleeding. These factors increase the risk of bleeding, and the most important one is the previous history of bleeding. This is strongest predictive risk factor, and the others are age greater than 75, liver or renal disease. As in case of liver, there are the diminished coagulants which are produced by the liver, and the renal disease there is platelet dysfunction, so bleeding can occur. In case of malignancy, as malignancy affect the coagulation effect, and thrombocytopenia and aspirin use, it can decrease the uh, platelet effect function in case of hypertension and diabetes, in case of anemia, prior stroke, fall risk, genetic dispositions, previous disorders related to the coagulants, supratherapeutic INR, and alcohol abuse. These are the most important factors which can increase the risk of bleeding in patient those are on anticoagulants. Now we will discuss some cases related to our topic atrial fibrillation. These MCQs are from the many sources like Embose, USMLE, Step 1, CK. Now we will discuss one by one so that we see which and what are the symptoms, signs and symptoms, and which are the complications with which patient present to us. First, our first scenario is 36 56-year-old man comes to the emergency department due to the chest palpitations. He feels that his heartbeat is fast and irregular. The patient has no chest pain, shortness of breath, dizziness. Physical examination confirms the presence of an irregular rhythm with a heart rate of 230 per minute. He hosted a party last night and consumed a large amount of alcohol. The patient normally drinks only 2 to 3 times of a year. He is otherwise healthy and takes no medication. Now the question will be, what is the diagnosis, what will be the ECG findings, what will be the management. So first of all we see what are the risk factors in this patient for the atrial fibrillation. Chest palpitations, this is the sign and symptoms. The heartbeat is fast and irregular. As we earlier mentioned in our topic, the rhythm in case of atrial fibrillation is irregular. Then on physical examination, the beat is irregular. Heart rate is 230 per minute, which is very high. And there is also a patient consumed a large amount of alcohol, and we already mentioned that in case of binge alcohol there is a risk of acute atrial fibrillation, and we call it holiday night syndrome. So what is the diagnosis atrial fibrillation on the case of rhythm, heart rate, and the history. What will be the ECG finding? ECG finding will be the absence of P wave, or there is the fibrillary waves. What is the management in case of this? We will wait and observe the patient for the recurrent atrial fibrillation. If it subsides on its own, we do not interfere or give any treatment. In case of recurrent atrial fibrillation, we proceed previous management according to previous management we discussed earlier. Then the next case is a 61-year-old man with a 5-year history of COPD comes to the physician for a follow-up examination. He has had episodes of palpitation over the past week. His only medication is tiotropium formoterol inhaler. His pulse is 140 per minute, irregular. Respiratory rate is 17 per minute and BP is 116 by 70. Pulse oximetry on the room air shows saturation 95%. Lungs are clear to auscultation. Cardiac examination shows no murmur, rubs or gallops. Serum concentration of electrolytes is normal. Serum concentration of electrolytes, TSH and cardiac troponins are with the reference range. What is the most appropriate next step in the case of management? Now, increase age, history of COPD. These are the risk factors for the increased age, and COPD, pulmonary disease are the risk factor for the atrial fibrillation. Now in history, palpitations over the week, and pulse is 140 and irregular, which is indicated our diagnosis of atrial fibrillation. Saturation is normal and other things are normal. Now what is the most appropriate next step? Does we do the cardioversion? Does we we give the metoprolol, propranolol, or either we do the diltiazem air? what we do in this case, as patient is vitally stable, we do this rate control strategy, which is either we prescribe the beta blockers or calcium channel blockers. Now in this case we do not give the beta non-specific, especially non-specific beta blocker, as patient is COPD, and beta blockers can cause bronchoconstriction and increase the dyspnea. So in case we what we do the rate control and we give the verapamil to the patient. Now in the third case, a 63-year-old man comes to the ER because of the retrosternal chest pain, 7/10 in intensity. He has coronary artery disease, hypertension, type 2 diabetes. His current medication are aspirin, simvastatin, metformin, enalapril. He has smoked one pack of cigarette daily for 33 years. On arrival, his pulse is 136 per minute, respiratory 20, BP is 85/55. The lung circulatory auscultation, cardiac examination shows no abnormalities. Which is the most appropriate next step in this patient? Now the most appropriate step for this patient is the synchronized cardioversion. Now why this is, we will discuss this. Risk factors in this patient are the increased age and coronary artery disease, hypertension, diabetes. These are the risk factors for the atrial fibrillation. Now patient present with which are the signs which show patient is hemodynamically unstable are the retrosternal chest pain, tachycardia, tachypnea, and hypotension. These things show patient is hemodynamically unstable, and we want to achieve the sinus rhythm, and we do synchronized cardioversion in this patient. So we do not do the rate control, as we do not give the beta blockers or calcium channel blockers, because they further exaggerate the condition of the patient, as they can cause hypotension and bronchoconstriction in patient further deteriorate. So we do this synchronized cardioversion. So the most appropriate next step is the synchronized cardioversion. In case later on we prescribe the anticoagulants, and in this patient, what will be the Chadwick score in age 60? It must be the 65 to 74. So in this patient, Chadwick score in case of coronary artery disease score is 1, hypertension score is 1, diabetes score is 1. So total score is 3. So then we will prescribe the anticoagulants. Here our topic of atrial fibrillation ends. Thank you and Allah Hafiz.